Alexa. We've got some really great stuff in there to unpack tonight and over the coming weeks as well. I'm really looking forward to this series. I think it's going to be a great way to finish the year together. As Martin said, to go back to basics and just sit with the news that's here in the Old Testament. Twice. Well, my dad wore cologne to work and to nice events like dinner out as like for a birthday, and I distinctly remember it, and I really love it. I can smell it now in my memory. One of those childhood things that you remember. It was the blue jupe, if you're wondering, and just smells like sophistication to me. Dad in his suit, in his work car, the work Commodore off to work. Smells like dependability and provision. And Ecclesiastes 7 in the Old Testament says, better than fine perfume, even better than blue jupe, is a good name. Better than a fine perfume is a good name. And I don't just mean like my son's great name, which is Herb. I think it's a great name. It's not talking about that, though. It's talking about reputation and like the name that you've got for yourself, the name that you think about yourself. Who am I and what am I to everybody, and how people perceive you and how you perceive you. Better than fine perfume is a good name. And we humans are always trying to make names for ourselves. And I wonder about you, the name that you've been trying to make for yourself this last year, how you perceive of yourself, how others perceive of you. Good or bad, fair, good, or unfair. That you don't deserve that, actually. Maybe you've got a bad name and you don't deserve it, or maybe you do. I in a conversation at the surf club with somebody, I was trying to sign up, and I think she thought I was trying to get money because she both offered me a job and a discount in the same conversation. I said, no, that's not what I was just trying to offer to help. And I thought I must have a bad name with her, at least, or I'm getting one. And it felt really like I didn't like having a bad reputation with the office lady. But I wonder what yours is. And it comes up even in this ancient text, 2,000 years ago. It says in Genesis 11, just before where we were reading, it says there's a group of people trying to make a name for themselves. And it's interesting to think about the ways that we try and make reputation or name for ourselves. And one good way to do it as a group of people is to build a big tower. It's what we do in cities. They're either very tall or very beautiful. So we've got the Opera House, and Sydney has a bit of a name for itself, and it's just kind of associated with that building, isn't it? The Opera House. And you think of some of the really great cities of the world and the name that is associated with them and the greatness of their towers. Well, in Genesis chapter 11, it says that there was a group of people, and they said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered." But God judges this as the wrong thing to do. We're not supposed to make a name for ourselves, actually. He judges it and he scatters the people. And Genesis 11 there has this half-built tower that's been abandoned, half done. And it's a bit of a picture for that section of the book, because what started so powerfully and beautifully and abundantly, God spoke life into existence. Out of nothing, he brought life. Genesis chapter 1. He spoke and there was light. Very quickly unravels through human selfishness and sin. And Genesis chapter 11 is the end of that episode of 1 to 11 and finishes with this half-built tower of people who are trying to make a name for themselves. But then there's chapter 12, a new beginning again. Just as God spoke and made the universe, just as he spoke into darkness and brought light, he's going to speak again and he's going to bring a new thing that brings life. Look, chapter 12, verse 1 says, "The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's household, to the land I will show you." God's starting a new thing, and he's bringing something out of darkness. Now, it mentions Abram there and a land, and actually this is the start of the nation of Israel. Abraham is the first of that nation, and he's being sent to possess a land, actually. And that's pretty interesting with the terrors that are going on at the moment in our world regarding that land. And I guess I want to say at this point, there's so much that ought to be said and done, and that's it. I can barely imagine a way forward. But that's not a straight line from this text to what should happen today. And I don't want us to be distracted by that and chat with me or someone else afterwards and share reflections and things. But that's not what we're going to be doing. We're not doing a straight line because there is no straight line from here to there. And actually, this passage has something, I'd say, I think this passage has something more important than land to talk about. So that's where we're going to go. But I'm not shutting the conversation down. Let's chat about it afterwards if you want to. Hey, how does that work? Or I'll tell you how it works, Blake. I'm interested. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's household to the land I will show you. God commands, but with the command to go comes a promise. Listen, I will make you into a great nation. I'll bless you. And I will make your name, I'll make it great. It speaks to what we've just heard, an unfinished building where people tried to make a name for themselves and God said no. And now God says, it starts with just one person, not a big city, not a big town, one person who's actually very weak, as we'll see lots of different ways, and says, I will make your name and make it great. And you will be a blessing, and I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God promises three things to Abram. Well, he commands him, and then he promises three things. I'm going to make your nation, I'm going to make your name great, and I'm going to bless you and make you actually a flowing conduit of blessing, so that all the nations around you are blessed. And you see little glimpses of this to start with, and then it flows out bigger. So one of the glimpses I love when I realized this a few years ago is that Joseph, one of Abraham's descendants, goes to Egypt and there's a famine. And because of the wise counsel of that Israelite, Egypt has food in the famine. And so Abraham's descendants are blessing the nations around Egypt. And then actually it builds even bigger into Solomon and the wisdom that flows into all the world from Solomon. And the world comes to him to get the wisdom. But there is a nation that grows as well, and their name becomes great. And particularly, their name becomes the people of God. It's so special. God is so mighty and to be feared in the Old Testament. And he calls Israel my treasured possession. There's a beautiful promise here that God is making a nation. He's giving a name. My treasured possession, my people, mine. And he's giving blessing to them and through them. That's the promise to Abraham. And as I said, we're not going to kind of trace that through the rest of the Old Testament, but it sets the course for the rest of the New Testament. These are the things that are happening in the Old Testament. And I'd actually say sometimes when I get stuck in the Old Testament, sometimes you get a straightforward passage as you're reading. I was reading Jeremiah 7 this morning, and it's pretty straightforward. It's clear. It just says some stuff that makes sense about my heart and who I am. But sometimes you come to a passage and it's a little strange and you're not sure what's going on. And I'd say at a point like that, if you find an Old Testament passage that seems obscure to you, it probably relates to God making these people into a great nation, or blessing the name, and or making them a blessing themselves. These are these three things that God is doing in the Old Testament, the story of the Old Testament. But we're not going to stop there, because there's an even bigger thing happening in this passage than just setting the course of the Old Testament. This passage also sets the paradigm for the whole of God's people, Old Testament and New Testament, including now, of how to relate to him. Here is, in these verses, the paradigm of how God relates to his people and how his people who are given his name relate to him. He gives life, and we respond with faith. God gives, and we accept by faith. This is how he interacts with his people. When God gives you his name and names you, not the name that you name yourself. I wonder already if you're just pondering, how do you perceive yourself? What's the name you've been given for yourself? I'm going to be this kind of person when I grow up. Still think that sometimes in the next few years. Or the name that maybe your family or the people at work say about you, good or bad. No, God gives you life, and particularly in this passage and for the Christian, gives you a great name to be called his people. And we receive that by faith, to be called his people by faith. And I want to just unpack that idea of receiving a name from God, not from the world, not from you, but receiving a name from God and what it looks like. First of all, when you receive your name from God, it brings life. When you become his people and called his very own and his treasured possession, it brings new life. That's what we see with Abraham and Sarah. He's 75 years old. And I just want you to start doing the math of the promise that he's just received to become a great nation. He has no kids, but he's just been promised by God that he'll be turned into a great nation. He's got to have kids. But he's 75 years old. And his wife, Sarah, is 65 years old. If you do the math from Genesis 17 backwards to here, because it doesn't mention her age particularly. She's 65, but also she's barren. It says, it's a double thing. It says, Sarah was childless because she was not able to conceive. But God is going to bring life. He brought it in Genesis chapter 1 into darkness, and he's going to bring life here. And for you too, when he puts his name on you, when you're called Christian, when you're called treasured possession of God, he will bring life to you that is not within you otherwise and wouldn't have come from you. He will do things that wouldn't have happened. And particularly, he'll bring you into relationship with him, and he will never leave you or forsake you. He'll walk with you wherever you go, and he will walk with you into death and out the other side into heaven. You will be his people, and he will bring life. But secondly, when he calls you his own and gives you a great name, his name, treasured possession, it'll lead to death as well. That's what happens for Abraham. He's told to go from his family and the place that he lives and all the things that he's known as home. He's called out of that. And I'd say this is the paradigm for the Christian life, as well as for Abraham and the Old Testament way of engaging with God, is he calls us away, and he calls us to die to ourselves. Remember in Romans 6, it talks about that idea of the old self needs to die. The King James says the old man has died. Such a striking phrase. The old Blake that constituted who I was and that was my name is dead. And Jesus says, if anyone would be my disciple, they've got to take up their cross, deny themselves and follow me. He says, whoever would keep their life, if you hold on to it and try and live, you'll lose it. But if you lose it, keep it. It's amazing. Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian who literally died because of where his faith led him, wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, which is trying to come to terms with this idea that to follow God is to die, the cost of discipleship. And he says this, he says, the cross is laid on every Christian. The first Christ suffering, which every person must experience, is the call to abandon the attachments of this world. When Christ calls a person, he bids him come and die. What is it to bear the name of God? It is to come and die, to lay down your desires and where you were shooting for and the things that you thought your life was going to be about. It's to give Jesus lordship in your life. Not you anymore, but to give Jesus lordship now. We die, as God points out in the New Testament, the sins of Bondi and the sins of Australia and the sins of the world said, they're not for you anymore, Blake. You stay away from those. And sometimes I want them. And sometimes I want to live like the people in Bondi. And there's certain ways that I'm not to live like Bondi. We die as God calls us not to relate to people in a way that serves me, but we've been put there and we've been put in front of those people to serve them and be a blessing, to love our neighbours. We're called to die as we love God above anything else. We're called to die. But remember, when we're called Christian, we're called to life at the same time. A life that is truly life. And as Jesus says in that same passage of Mark 8, he says, why would you forfeit your soul for anything in the world? And so there is a death in being called Christian, being called the name that God gives you, but there is life that is truly life. The third thing that happens when God puts his name on you is that it happens by faith and not by sight. He calls you to great things, true things. For Abraham, it was those three promises. For us, it's life in Christ. But it doesn't always look like it with the things that are in front of us, does it? And so it's by faith and not by sight. Now, this doesn't mean that the Christian life is, as some have described it in the last 2 decades, a blind leap in the dark. I think in particular Richard Dawkins, the atheist. It's not a blind leap in the dark, but you're like, I guess I'm just a positive person and I kind of trust, and so I'll just go this direction. It seems good. That's not faith. Faith is knowing a person that is trustworthy and knowing that even though you can't see, they can, and they're going to lead you forward. Do you see what it is? It's a firm trust of a person that's worth your trust. And there's other people that you won't go into the dark with because you don't trust them, you don't know them. But we trust God. And the way of operating through the Old Testament and New Testament, and that means now, is by faith. It's by trusting Him. Abraham is setting out on a journey. He's not lifted from there and suddenly there's a great nation and he's in a land with a great name and blessing. It's going to take years and years. Not for another 25 years until he sees one son, let alone a whole nation. And I'm coming to learn slowly from God that this is the shape of the Christian faith, is that it is by faith, not by instant sight. He's definitely taking us there, and He will. But it doesn't always look like it. And sometimes it even looks like, as Abraham will find, and so we'll find in the series, that God is even working, it looks like God might even be working against what He's promised. What we're to do is we're to hold on to the word that came to us, the promise, that He is bringing life. It's by faith and not by sight. I love in Romans 4 that we had read, thanks Alexa, it says that Abraham is the father of all who believe, not just the father of those with genetics of his, but of all those who believe. And it talks about Abraham and it says he was fully persuaded that God could bring life out of nothing. And that's the shape of the Christian life, is to, even though you can't see in front of you, you know one who does see, and you're fully persuaded that He's going to do what He said He's going to do. And so we come to our last point, which is I want to talk about, can we trust Him? Can we trust Him? Because it's a big thing to trust somebody who's saying there's something here and I know you can't see, but come with me. I want to say we can. Of course I want to say we can, but why do I want to say we can? Because Jesus, who has the name Son of God from eternity, has the place by the side of God the Father, left that place for us and went on a journey and has become like you and I because He loves us. And at the cross, He's taken your name, sinner, condemned. He's taken your name, broken, failing, disappointing to God. He's taken it and He's nailed it to the cross and it's gone. And He's given us His name, sons and daughters of God. Because He's done that at the cross, you can trust Him. And you can live by faith and not by sight. And you can take the first step today. And as I've said, this is the paradigm for the Christian life, that God calls you His own and says, I have life for you. And we respond in faith, not by sight. And I just want to say, as we seek to kind of bring this to bear, that this is the paradigm for becoming a Christian. This is how you become a Christian. It's how Abraham becomes a Christian. But it's also the paradigm for how to live each day as a Christian, to go in faith, to lay down your life today, and even this half an hour. Lay down your life this half an hour and take up life this half an hour and find the life that's true. This is the paradigm for becoming a Christian and for walking as a Christian. And this is why we're going to spend 10-ish weeks talking about and looking at Abraham and learning the lessons of life by faith. What does it mean to do it step after step? What does it mean to do it for 25 years before you have your first child, when God promised 25 years ago that you would become a great nation? What is it? What's day 1065 look like? I don't know if we'll get that fine detail, but that's the kind of thing we need to think about. How do you walk by faith? You see it illustrated in good ways and bad ways through Abraham's walk in Genesis 12 to 21. Right now, though, so I'm kind of just want to jig us up for the next few weeks. It's really great to walk through this bit. But tonight, I want you to turn away from the names that you've been given and names that you've even given yourself, be they good or bad. But if you've made a name for yourself, I suggest turning away from it, because both good names and bad names are hard to bear. About 10 years ago, someone at a conference, an older minister who I really admired, said, you and Sarah are a bit of a power couple, aren't you? And I thought, ooh, that feels good. I didn't do that because that'd be weird. But that's what it looked like on the inside of my heart. That felt good to be called. But it's a heavy thing to be called a power, because I've learned a few years later, we're not a power couple. We're okay. We go all right, don't we, Sarah? But we're not a power couple. And so it becomes this kind of label that, maybe I ought to be living. And is everybody thinking that I should be punching up here when I just punch here? And I'd say actually a good name, whether you've earned it or not, will run out on you at some point. People forget, and it wears out, and at the very least, it won't get you through death. So I'd suggest turn away from the good name you may have earned in one way or the other. But also turn away from the names, the bad names you've been given, and the bad reputation you might have. You may be a very disappointing person. I know I disappoint people in lots of ways, lots of times. You may be someone who has a list of failures that are very quick to mind for you or for the people around you. You may have hurt people and really sinned very gravely against others and against God. But the Bible says God gives you his name as his treasured possession. And it's for free by grace. And you want to sit in that name and hold on to it. I'm loved. And this life from the name of God and death in the name of God and by faith is what I do in my quiet times each morning. I take hold of the life that is truly life. I tell God, please help me to let go of this stuff. Let me die to myself today, because I find that hard. And I do it by faith, because sometimes I don't feel like it. It's kind of hard. And I don't see it right in front of me. But this is what we do. We grab hold of our name as loved by God. To start the life and each day.